A glittering birthday party inside a crime lord's mansion looks perfect on the surface. Champagne towers, designer suits, and the most dangerous men in Los Angeles, raising glasses to unholy alliances until a pregnant wife suddenly vanishes, and no one in that room of killers dares to ask why. What the guests can't see is the most brutal truth hidden beneath the marble floors and the jazz music. She has been locked in a freezing basement by the man who controls everything above her own husband, desperate to impress the Mafia boss sitting at his table. But Marcus Whitfield never expects a single routine security check to expose it all. When a bodyguard opens a door that was never meant to be touched and hears a woman's desperate cry for help, he reports it to his boss, a man known for his cold heart and ruthless reputation. At first, Dominic Castellano dismisses it. Not his business, not his problem. Until he discovers the woman trapped below is Elena Vasquez, the same woman who saved his life 3 years ago in Chicago, the one he has been searching for across every city, never knowing she was right beneath his feet all along. What follows is a collision of debt and betrayal, of cruelty and redemption, that shatters an empire built on lies in a single night. The man who believed his money could buy silence and his power could bury secrets is about to learn that some debts can't be escaped and some saviors come dressed as sinners. Stay with us, because once the truth rises from that basement, nothing at this party will ever be the same. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from and what time it is there. If this story moves you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss what happens next. The Whitfield mansion glowed in the Beverly Hills night like a colossal jewel set in the heart of the city, warm, golden light from hundreds of crystal chandeliers spilling across immaculate white marble and casting shimmering ribbons that ran the length of the wide corridors. Towering walls dressed in expensive oil paintings and massive gold-framed mirrors threw back the spectacle of one of the most extravagant parties imaginable, while the scent of fresh flowers imported from Europe mingled with costly perfume into an air so sweet it was almost suffocating. Smooth jazz drifted from a live band tucked into the corner of the grand room, the deep warmth of a saxophone threading itself through the soft touch of a piano like the perfect undercurrent for whispered conversations. Servants in spotless white uniforms moved silently through the crowd, balancing silver trays piled with glasses of Dom Perignon champagne and elaborate hors d'oeuvres. Every detail tonight had been arranged with obsessive precision down to the millimeter, from the way white roses were set into crystal vases to the way candlelight trembled on every banquet table. This was not simply a birthday party. This was a declaration of power. The guests passing through the mansion's ornate wrought iron gates were not ordinary faces. They were kingpins of the Los Angeles underworld, business magnates whose names appeared in Forbes, while the true source of their money was something no one dared to question. They were politicians with camera-bright smiles and hands stained by shadowy deals. They were lawyers, bankers, brokers of influence for whom a single phone call could rewrite the fate of an entire family. Men wore perfectly tailored black suits, Patek Philippe watches flashing at their wrists. Women swept in with dazzling evening gowns, diamonds at their throats, their arms linked with powerful men like trophies put on display. They laughed, they toasted, they praised one another with elegant words, yet behind every smile was calculation. Behind every handshake, a silent agreement. Behind every glance, an assessment, a measurement, a weighing of whether the person across the room was worth claiming as an ally or better marked as an enemy. And standing at the center of all that luxury and power was Marcus Whitfield. 42 years old, tall, his brown hair slicked back to flawless perfection without a single strand out of place. He wore a black three-piece suit fitted to a body still hard with the discipline of morning gym sessions. A platinum Rolex Daytona caught the light whenever he lifted his glass of champagne. Marcus's smile was wide and warm, convincing enough that anyone meeting him for the first time might believe they were looking at a respectable gentleman. He moved through the crowd with practiced ease, stopping to shake one hand, clapping another man on the shoulder with friendly familiarity, leaning in to murmur a joke that drew comfortable laughter. Marcus Whitfield looked like the perfect host, celebrating his 42-year birthday with the generosity and grace expected of a successful man. But tonight was not only a birthday. Tonight was the night Marcus had waited for through 2 long years, the night he would formally step into the highest circle of power, the night he would meet and impress the man feared across the entire Los Angeles underworld. And for that, everything had to be perfect. Every detail had to be controlled, even the details no one was ever allowed to know. Marcus glanced at the watch on his wrist. Nearly 10 o'clock. The most important guest still had not arrived. A brief shiver of unease ran along his spine, and he crushed it down at once. Everything was ready. Everything was under control. Then the sound of engines rolled in from the gate. Not a single car but a convoy. The heavy, restrained thunder of luxury SUVs slicing straight through the jazz. Every conversation in the ballroom cut off at once, and all eyes turned toward the front door as glossy black vehicles eased to a stop at the stone steps. Marcus drew a deep breath, straightened his lapels, and walked toward the entrance. The moment he had been waiting for had arrived. The door of the first vehicle swung open, and a tall man stepped out. Dominic Castellano, 36 years old, yet he carried the authority of an emperor who had ruled the underworld for more than a decade. He stood taller than most of the men in that room, his solid frame wrapped in a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit without a single unnecessary crease. His black hair was slicked back neatly, revealing a high forehead and a sharp, clean hairline. But what made people hold their breath when they looked at him was not his height or his expensive suit, it was his eyes. Dark brown eyes so close to black they looked like polished stone, cold and keen as a freshly honed blade, sweeping the room with the calm of someone who had seen too much blood spilled to be impressed by anything anymore. Each footfall on the stone steps landed with a firm, even weight, steady as the heartbeat of a man who had never learned how to tremble. Close on either side of Dominic were two men. On his right was Vince Romano, 32 years old, his most trusted bodyguard. Vince was built like a heavyweight fighter, broad-shouldered, thick-armed, his gaze constantly raking every corner around them as if tagging each potential threat. On his left was Tony Moretti, 45 years old, Dominic's right hand and advisor. Tony was thinner, older, but the sharp intelligence behind his gold-rimmed glasses made it clear this was the man who held every secret and every piece of information his boss needed to know. The three of them moved like a single unit, their steps synchronized, no one drifting ahead, no one falling behind, as though they had rehearsed this entrance 1,000 times. The air in the ballroom shifted the instant Dominic appeared in the doorway. Loud conversations dropped into whispers. Confident smiles tightened at the edges. Eyes that had been proud a moment earlier lowered just a fraction when they met the passing sweep of Dominic Castellano's glance. It was not blatant fear. Everyone in that room possessed power in their own way, but they understood there was a line between power and ultimate power, and Dominic Castellano stood on the far side of that line, the boss of bosses, the man whose single nod could decide who lived and who died in the Los Angeles underworld. Marcus moved quickly to the door, the smile on his face wider than ever, his arms opening as though greeting a close friend he had not seen in years. The enthusiasm pouring off him was almost too much, like a salesman trying to close the most important deal of his life. Marcus took Dominic's hand in both of his own and shook it hard, his mouth spilling warm greetings without pause. He thanked Dominic for coming, said it was the greatest honor, said the party truly began only now, with the presence of Mr. Castellano. Marcus's voice sat a little higher than usual, his speech a shade faster than it needed to be, as if he were trying to fill every silence before it had a chance to form. Dominic answered with a slight nod and a polite smile that never reached his eyes. He let Marcus guide him inside, accepted a glass of champagne from a servant with courtesy, but only lifted it to take a small sip before lowering it again. He listened to Marcus talk and gave almost nothing back, only the occasional nod or a short, non-committal sound. And while Marcus went on about business plans and opportunities for cooperation, Dominic's eyes quietly took inventory of everything around them. He watched the way the servants moved, the way the other guests reacted, the way Marcus kept flicking his gaze toward the staircase whenever he spoke about the house. Something was off about the man in front of him. Dominic could not name it precisely, but instincts sharpened by decades in the underworld were sending warning signals. Marcus smiled too much, talked too much, tried too hard, and the ones who tried too hard were usually the ones hiding something. In the middle of Marcus's flowing monologue about the mansion's history, Dominic suddenly cut in with a question. His voice was low, calm, yet it carried enough weight to stop Marcus mid-sentence. Dominic asked about Marcus's wife. A simple, social question. A husband's birthday party where the wife never appeared was something worth asking about. Dominic watched Marcus's reaction with the kind of attention he would give to prey. Marcus did not flinch. The smile on his mouth even softened when he mentioned her. He said Elena was 7 months pregnant and the doctor had advised absolute rest. He said the noise and the crowd were not good for the baby. He said Elena was very sorry she could not come down to greet the guests, but she sent her apologies. Marcus's voice was smooth, coherent, without the slightest hesitation, as if he had practiced this answer hundreds of times in front of a mirror. Dominic nodded and said nothing more, but his eyes slid toward the staircase leading upstairs, where it was dark and silent, as if no life existed there at all. Marcus's explanation for his wife's absence rippled through the ballroom like a gentle wave. Guests nodded with sympathetic understanding, trading looks that said they had heard it all before and found it sensible enough. 7 months pregnant, needing rest, a doctor advising her to stay away from noise. The story sounded completely reasonable, completely ordinary, completely not worth questioning. Marcus told it with such ease that he almost believed it himself. Every detail had been arranged with care, every word chosen with precision, his voice blending the worry of a devoted husband with the quiet pride of a man about to become a first-time father. It was a perfect lie, polished until no crack could be seen. And as if to strengthen Marcus's story even further, Natasha Blake appeared at his side at exactly the right moment. She approached with the confident stride of someone accustomed to drawing every eye in the room. 29 years old, her golden blonde hair styled into soft waves spilling over bare shoulders. She wore a wine-red evening gown that hugged her body and rose in a daring slit to mid-thigh, showing long, slender legs above 12-centimeter heels. A diamond necklace flashed at her throat, and ruby earrings burned red to match the dress. Natasha stopped beside Marcus, her hand brushing his arm with an intimacy she did not bother to hide, her lips opening into a radiant smile, as though she were the lady of the house. She slipped into the role of welcoming guests with an ease that was almost unsettling. Natasha moved between clusters of invitees with calculated grace, laughing at the right moments, nodding in the right places, offering compliments just sincere enough to make people feel seen. She described the dishes, offered champagne, guided guests toward the banquet tables as if she had done it 100 times in this very home. No one officially introduced Natasha as anyone. No one needed to ask. Her place at Marcus's side, the way she smiled at him, the way her hand drifted now and then to his back or shoulder, said everything. In a room filled with power and secrets, the relationship between Marcus and Natasha was only a small secret, one everyone knew and no one bothered to name. Even so, whispers existed. In the corner of the room, 2 older women exchanged loaded looks as they watched Natasha walking with Marcus. One tilted her head and murmured whether the other had ever met Marcus's wife. The second shook her head and said almost no one had seen Elena Whitfield at any event for nearly 2 years. They whispered that it was strange, a young, beautiful wife completely absent while her husband kept appearing with another woman. But their whispers never traveled beyond their own ears. In this world, too much curiosity could be a deadly mistake. As if she sensed the eyes and the murmurs, Natasha brought up Elena herself when a polite male guest asked after the lady of the house. Her voice turned sweet and concerned as she said the poor thing. Pregnancy was truly exhausting. She said she had gone upstairs to see Elena before the party, and Elena was sorry she could not come down to greet everyone. Natasha sighed with practiced compassion and added that motherhood was not easy, and all they could do was support Elena through this difficult phase. Natasha's words were so perfect they were almost believable. Almost. Dominic stood a few steps away, the champagne in his hand still nearly untouched. He did not join the conversations around him. He simply watched, his face empty of expression. His eyes tracked Natasha, tracked Marcus, then slid again toward the staircase leading upstairs. The staircase was silent, pitch dark. Not a sound, not a shadow, not a single sign of anyone resting above. If a wife 7 months pregnant were truly in the house, servants should have been moving up and down. There should have been light from a bedroom. There should have been something, but that staircase looked like it led into dead country. Dominic said nothing. He only tipped his head slightly toward Vince, standing a few yards away, a motion so small it could have been missed. But Vince understood at once. He gave a single nod, then quietly peeled away from the crowd and disappeared into the corridor leading deeper into the mansion. A silent order had been given. While the jazz and laughter echoed across the upper floor, an entirely different world existed only a few dozen steps away. The basement of the Whitfield mansion was a place light never reached. The air down here was thick, cold, and damp, like the inside of a tomb. 4 grim gray concrete walls boxed in a cramped space with no windows and no ventilation, only a weak yellow bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting a pallid glow that was enough to see by but not enough to push the darkness back. The floor was bare concrete, icy as winter stone, the cold seeping upward through every thin layer of fabric until it felt as if it were entering bone. The smell of mildew mixed with dust and the rusty bite of old pipes running along the walls, forming an air so stifling it was hard to breathe. And in the middle of that basement hell, Elena Vasquez sat curled in on herself on the frozen floor. 27 years old, yet in this moment she looked at least 10 years older. Her dark brown hair, once glossy, was now a tangled mess, clumped in places with sweat and grime. Her face was so pale it seemed nearly translucent. Her lips cracked from lack of water, rough and split, with blood at the corners. Her brown eyes, once bright, were sunken now. Deep shadows dragged beneath them, and down her cheekbones like bruises. She wore a thin, white nightgown that had yellowed and been smeared with dirt, utterly useless against the basement's bone-deep cold. But the most painful part of the picture was the 7-month belly rising beneath that thin fabric, where an innocent life was growing without any notion that its mother was being held like a criminal. From above, the music bled down, warped by the thick floorboards. The warm saxophone turned into a ghostly moan. The guests' laughter and chatter became distant echoes, as if drifting in from some other world. Elena heard every sound, and each burst of laughter cut her like a knife. Directly above her, her husband was throwing a party. Directly above her, dozens of people were lifting their glasses to celebrate the birthday of the man who had locked her down here. Directly above her, life went on as if she did not exist at all. The contrast was so cruel, Elena wanted to scream, to howl until someone heard her, until the whole world knew the truth. She forced herself up, bracing a hand on the cold wall to stand. Her knees trembled, her body drained after days of barely eating enough to keep going. Elena dragged herself toward the only door of the basement, a thick iron slab with layered locks on the outside. She clenched her hand into a fist and pounded on it. The blows rang inside the cramped space, but they could never pierce the iron and the heavy floor to reach anyone upstairs. She kept pounding anyway, pounding until her hand bled, pounding until she no longer had the strength to lift her arm. She cried for help, her voice hoarse from screaming so much over the past days, her throat raw as if rubbed with salt. But no one answered. No one came. The basement swallowed her pleas the way it swallowed everything else, including whatever hope she had left. Elena slumped beside the door, her back against the freezing metal, and in that exhausted moment, memory surged in. She remembered that night, only a few days ago. Marcus had stood in front of her, the handsome face she once loved now twisted with rage. He had heard her on the phone. He knew she had discovered his secret, the money laundering, the deals with gangs, the numbers in the notebook she had glimpsed by accident. Marcus's eyes had been ice cold when he grabbed her arm, dragged her down the hallway, opened the basement door, and shoved her onto the pitch-dark stairs. She still remembered the sensation of falling, her arms wrapping around her belly to protect the baby, her shoulder slamming into the wall, and the iron door crashing shut above her. The click of the lock had been as cold and final as a sentence. Tears slid down Elena's cheeks, but she no longer had the strength to sob out loud. She brought both hands to her swollen belly and felt the faint kicks from within. The baby was still alive. The baby was still fighting. And for that baby, she was not allowed to give up. Elena bowed her head, pressed her lips to her belly, and whispered in a voice that was rough with strain yet firm with resolve. She told her child that she would not quit. She said she would find a way to get them out of here. She said she promised. And in that very moment, Elena heard another sound. Footsteps. Not from high above the way they always were, but footsteps coming closer, moving along the corridor beyond the basement, approaching the door. Elena lifted her head, her heart beating faster, not knowing whether what rose in her chest was hope or the beginning of a new fear. Vince Romano moved through the crowd like a shadow. No one paid attention to him, and that was exactly what he wanted. 12 years serving as Dominic Castellano's bodyguard had taught him how to make himself invisible when necessary, how to watch without being watched, how to listen without letting anyone know he was listening. The boss's order was clear even without being spoken aloud. Check security, learn this house, find out if anything was suspicious. And Vince always carried out orders thoroughly. He started in the kitchen, where the cooks and servers were busy preparing food for the party. Vince passed through like a guest who had wandered off while looking for the restroom, his eyes flicking over every corner, every door, every face. Nothing out of place, just hired hands doing their jobs, too busy to wonder about the unfamiliar man walking by. He kept moving through the hallways, noting the positions of doors, staircases, emergency exits, the way he did by habit. Even without a specific reason to doubt, Vince assessed everything as if he were preparing for an urgent retreat. The backyard of the mansion spread wide, with a pool lit a turquoise blue and gardens trimmed into elaborate shapes. A few guests stood outside smoking cigars and talking, their breath forming pale smoke in the cool night air. Vince slipped past them and continued around the back of the house. Nothing worth noting. Everything looked exactly the way a lavish estate was supposed to look. Then he reached a narrow corridor behind the kitchen, where the light was dimmer and the noise from the party faded into distant echoes. At the end of the corridor was a door, not a decorative wooden door like the others in the house. This one was iron, heavy, painted a dull gray. And what made Vince stop was the locking system. Not one lock, but three separate heavy-duty locks, the kind you saw in warehouses holding valuables or on safe rooms. Vince's brow tightened. This was a basement in a private home, not a bank. Why would it need 3 locks? He stepped closer and set his hand on the icy metal, and in that instant, footsteps sounded behind him. Vince turned and found a servant standing at the far end of the corridor, a middle-aged woman in a black and white uniform, holding an empty tray. Her eyes met Vince's, and in the space of a heartbeat, Vince saw something there. Fear. Not the fear of a house servant catching a stranger somewhere he did not belong, but the fear of someone watching another person drift too close to a secret they were not allowed to know. The woman's face changed, from ordinary to pale in a single breath. She said nothing, only turned and moved quickly, almost running, disappearing around the corner as if she had never been there at all. Vince stood still, every sense inside him sharpening. The servant's reaction was not normal at all. He turned back to the iron door, this time with a higher, colder focus, and then he heard it. A sound so faint it was nearly nothing. It wasn't coming through the thick iron center, but from down low. Vince crouched down. There, where the heavy door met the uneven concrete floor, was a tiny, jagged gap no wider than a coin, but enough for sound to escape. He pressed his ear against the cold stone near the crack, but then the sound changed. It was no longer meaningless scratching or tapping. It was a voice. A woman's voice, weak and hoarse, almost dissolving into the air before it could reach anyone's ear. But Vince caught every word. 2 words in English came from behind the iron door, raw with pain and desperation. "Help, please, please help me." Vince went rigid where he stood. Breath caught hard in his chest. There was someone behind that door, a woman, and she was begging for help. Vince stood motionless in front of the iron door, every thought in his head freezing over as solidly as his body. The weak voice from a moment ago still rang in his ears, 2 simple words carrying an entire world of desperation. Help, please. He had not imagined it. He was certain of that. 12 years in this line of work had taught him the difference between hallucination and reality, between random noise and a real cry for rescue. And this was a real cry for rescue. Inside the basement, Elena heard something strange at the door. Not the familiar footsteps of Marcus, not the clink of keys that signaled the meager daily food, but the sound of someone stopping, standing still, listening. Someone was out there, someone on the other side of the door. Elena's heart hammered so hard she thought she could hear it echoing in the empty cellar. This could be her only chance, a chance she did not know would ever come a second time, and she gathered what strength remained in her exhausted body, staggered upright, and lunged for the door. She dropped to her stomach, pressing her face as close to the gap at the bottom of the door as she could. Her hands clawed at the concrete, and she cried out into the sliver of open air, her voice hoarse but forcing itself to be as loud as it could. "Please, please save me. I'm pregnant. Help me." Vince heard every word with brutal clarity. It was no longer a weak whisper. It was the raw scream of someone drowning in despair. And one word hit him like an electric shock. Pregnant. A pregnant woman was locked behind this door. He stepped in, grabbed the first lock, and yanked hard. It did not budge. He tried the second, then the third. All of them were sealed tight, secure enough that he could not break them with bare hands. He needed keys, or specialized tools, or authority he did not have. Vince took a step back, his mind spinning. He had not been hired to fix this. He had been hired to protect Dominic, to keep the boss safe at this party, to see whether any danger was waiting in the shadows. What was happening inside Marcus Whitfield's family was not his business, not the organization's business. In their world there were unspoken boundaries everyone understood. Do not interfere in someone else's private matters. Do not ask what happens behind closed doors. Do not stick your nose into secrets that are not yours. Vince had lived by those rules his entire career, and they were the reason he was still alive. But the plea kept echoing in his head. Pregnant, a child not yet born was down there in that freezing basement with its mother, an innocent life with no choices, no voice, utterly dependent on the desperate woman pounding on a door and begging to be saved. Vince thought of his own mother, the woman who had raised him alone in the Bronx slums, who had worked 3 jobs a day so he would have food and clothes. If his mother had ever been trapped like this, he would have wanted someone to help her, anyone at all. The decision came in an instant. Vince could not break the door, but he knew who could. He knew who had enough power to make Marcus Whitfield open that door, whether Marcus wanted to or not. Vince turned and strode fast down the corridor toward the light and music of the party, each step sharp and urgent on the stone floor. In the basement, Elena heard the footsteps fading away. She sagged down beside the door, breath coming in ragged gasps, her body trembling with exhaustion and cold. Whoever it was had left. She did not know who they were, did not know whether they had truly heard her, did not know what they would do with what they had just discovered. But for the first time in days of captivity, a small spark of hope flared inside her chest. Someone knew she was here. Someone had heard her. And maybe, just maybe, that was all she needed. Vince threaded his way through the crowd, his eyes sweeping fast as he searched for Dominic. He found the boss near the bar, drink in hand, still almost full, his face as blank as a statue amid the laughter and chatter around him. Vince stepped in, lightly touched Dominic at the elbow, and tipped his head toward a quieter corner of the room. Dominic did not ask a question. He simply set his glass down and followed. They stopped behind a large marble column, hidden enough that no one could overhear. Vince spoke quickly and cleanly, his voice so low it was almost a whisper. He reported that there was a woman locked in the basement of this house. She was pregnant. She had been crying for help. He had heard her clearly through an iron door. The door was secured with 3 layers of locks, and a servant had fled the moment she saw him standing there. Something was very wrong in this house. Dominic listened without showing any emotion. When Vince finished, Dominic fell silent for a moment, dark eyes fixed on empty space. Then he spoke, cold and final. "Not our business." 4 short words that slammed like a door. Dominic said they were here for business, for a deal with Marcus Whitfield. Whatever happened inside Whitfield's family was Whitfield's problem. This world ran on unspoken rules, and one of the most important was never to interfere in another man's private affairs. Vince refused to let it go. He knew he was pushing against a direct order from his boss, but the image of that iron door and the desperate plea behind it would not leave his mind. He said she was begging for help, boss. He stressed that she was pregnant and locked in a basement cold as ice. There was a strain of urgency in Vince's voice he could not hold back. Dominic turned to look at him, his gaze sharp with warning. He repeated it again, slower this time, as if speaking to a child who could not understand. "Family business. We're here for work. Do not get involved in things that do not concern us." Dominic did not raise his voice, but the weight of each word made it clear to Vince the discussion was over. Right then, Marcus emerged from the crowd, a bright smile on his mouth as he approached them. He asked if everything was all right, asked whether Dominic needed anything, asked whether the party was to Mr. Castellano's liking. Marcus's eyes flicked over Vince with a flash of suspicion so slight it was almost invisible, before returning to Dominic. Dominic answered with his familiar social smile. He said it was nothing. They were only discussing tomorrow's schedule with his bodyguard. He praised the party, praised the house, praised the gracious hospitality. His tone was so perfect no one could suspect a thing. Marcus nodded with satisfaction, traded a few polite words, then turned away and melted back into the crowd to continue greeting other guests. Dominic stood still, watching Marcus's back as it moved farther away. Something gnawed inside his chest, a discomfort he could not name. Maybe it was the way Marcus smiled too brightly. Maybe it was the way a servant had run when she saw Vince near the basement. Maybe it was something else entirely. Dominic glanced toward Tony, standing a few steps away, and motioned his right hand closer. When Tony leaned in to listen, Dominic whispered a short order. "Investigate Marcus Whitfield's wife, discreetly, right now." Tony nodded without asking why and slipped quietly away from the party. Dominic did not know exactly why he had given the command. He only knew something in him would not settle. Tony Moretti left the party without anyone noticing, because 45 years of life and more than 20 years in the underworld had taught him how to become invisible when it mattered. He moved through the mansion's corridors with the easy manner of a guest searching for a restroom, yet the eyes behind his gold-rimmed glasses took in everything with the sharp patience of an old fox, and Dominic's order was simple. But Tony understood there was something serious beneath it, because the boss never asked him to investigate someone without a reason. Tony's first stop was the kitchen area, where he stood off to the side and watched the servants moving back and forth, looking for a face that seemed easiest to approach, and he chose a young woman wiping down a table nearby. Perhaps not yet 25, someone who looked new enough that she had not learned how to keep silent in the face of questions. Tony stepped close and offered a gentle smile like a father checking on a daughter, asked about the lady of the house, said he was an old friend of the family and wanted to send his congratulations to Elena, and the young woman hesitated, her eyes darting as if weighing what she could risk. Then she lowered her voice and said she had never met the mistress. She had worked here for 6 months, and not once had she seen Mrs. Whitfield. People said she was ill, always ill, and after she said it she hurried away as if she had already said too much. Tony stored the information and kept moving, found a quiet corner, took out his phone, and began to search. His fingers old but still quick as they slid across the screen, and pulled up the sources the organization could access. Elena Vasquez Whitfield, 27 years old, of Spanish origin, born in a small town near the Mexico border, immigrated to the United States as a child, grew up in the foster system in Chicago, graduated from nursing school, worked at St. Mary's Hospital in Chicago for 3 years before marrying Marcus Whitfield 2 years ago. A clean record, no criminal history, nothing suspicious on paper. But what made Tony stop was the images section, because when he searched for photos of Elena Vasquez Whitfield, he found almost nothing. No social media pictures because she had no accounts, no appearances at social events. Even though her husband was a well-known businessman who showed up in public constantly, no wedding photos published anywhere, nothing across the past 2 years, and a millionaire's wife who was completely invisible in the modern world was deeply abnormal, as if someone had deliberately erased every trace of her from the outside world. Tony frowned and decided to contact the organization's people in Chicago, called a man named Sal, one of Dominic's eyes and ears in the Windy City, the kind of person who could dig up information on anyone in minutes, and Tony asked Sal to find a photo of Elena Vasquez from the time she worked at St. Mary's Hospital, 3 years ago or earlier, any photo he could get. Sal grunted on the phone and told him to wait. 2 minutes later, Tony's phone buzzed with a message from Sal, with an attached image file, and Tony opened it to see a hospital staff photo, the kind of identification picture taken for a personnel record. The face in it, a young woman with dark brown hair, warm brown eyes, and a gentle smile, wearing a light blue nurse's uniform, her name printed on the badge, Elena Vasquez, RN. Tony stared at the picture, then stared again, and his heart began to beat faster, because he recognized that face. Not because he had ever met Elena Vasquez, but because he had seen that photograph before in a completely different context, on Dominic's desk in the private room at headquarters, a picture the boss had kept hidden for 3 years, the picture of the woman the boss had searched for through every corner of the country and never found, the woman who had saved the boss's life in Chicago 3 years earlier and then vanished as if she had never existed. Tony immediately dialed Dominic, his heart thudding in his chest, and when the boss picked up, Tony spoke in few words, but his voice could not hide its urgency. "Boss, you need to see this, right now, it can't wait." Dominic felt his phone vibrate in his jacket pocket in the middle of a polite exchange with a pudgy politician. He excused himself, stepped a few paces away, and answered. Tony's voice on the line sounded unusually urgent, something rare from a 45-year-old man who was normally steady as stone. And when Tony said Dominic needed to see something immediately, Dominic did not ask questions. He only said, "Send it." A few seconds later, the phone vibrated again with a new message. Dominic opened it and saw a photograph, a hospital employee ID picture against a pale blue background, the St. Mary's Hospital Chicago logo in the upper left corner, and centered in the frame the face of a young woman, dark brown hair falling to her shoulders, warm brown eyes looking straight into the camera, a gentle smile so soft it was almost innocent, her name printed on the badge in block letters, Elena Vasquez. Dominic's heart stopped for a beat. The world around him suddenly dissolved, the music, the laughter, the champagne, all of it turning into meaningless noise pushed far into the background. He stared at the photo, his thumb unconsciously enlarging the girl's face. There was no mistaking it. He had looked into those eyes every day for 3 years. He had hired someone to draw that face from his memory. He had sent people to every city, every state, every corner he could reach, searching for this woman. And now she was looking at him from his phone screen, with the name he finally knew. Elena Vasquez. Memory crashed over him like floodwater. 3 years ago, Chicago, a night of relentless rain, Dominic ambushed after a meeting with a partner who had turned on him, 2 bullets tearing through him, one in the shoulder, one in the side, running with blood soaking his clothes while they chased him, collapsing in a dark alley certain he would die there. And then someone pulling him up, a young woman, small, framed, wearing a nurse's uniform, just off a shift and on her way home. She did not ask who he was, did not ask why he was wounded, did not ask who was hunting him. She only dragged him into her small apartment, hid him in a closet when the men pounded on the door, lied and said she had not seen anyone. She took out medical supplies, stitched his wounds with the quick, sure hands of a professional nurse, gave him pain medication and antibiotics. She cared for him for 2 days, fed him porridge when he was too weak to sit up, changed his bandages when the wounds seeped blood, and when he recovered enough to stand, he wanted to repay her. He told her he could give her anything she wanted: money, a house, protection, anything. The girl only shook her head, her brown eyes on him with something he could not read. She said she had not saved him for money. She asked him for only one thing: do not harm the innocent. That was all. Then the next morning, when he woke, she was gone, the apartment empty, no trace of her left behind, as if she had been nothing but a dream. And now, 3 years later, he knew who she was: Elena Vasquez, 27 years old, Marcus Whitfield's wife. The woman Marcus claimed was resting upstairs. The woman Vince had heard begging for help from the basement. The woman who had saved Dominic's life was being locked in an icy cellar by her own husband, only a few dozen steps away, while Dominic stood here drinking champagne and trading small talk with strangers. He had ignored her cries. He had said it was not his business. He had left her in the dark while she was pregnant, suffering, desperate, waiting for someone to come. Rage flared in Dominic's chest like a fire fed by oil. Not a hot, reckless anger, but a colder, deeper fury, more dangerous than any outward outburst. His hand clenched around the phone until the casing creaked. His dark eyes swept over the crowd, searching for one face: Marcus Whitfield, standing at the bar, laughing with Natasha as if nothing in this world could touch him. Dominic straightened. He said nothing. He simply began walking toward Marcus, his steps heavy and steady, like the drumbeat of a war march. Vince saw the boss move and understood at once that something had changed. Tony appeared from the hallway and gave Vince a nod as both men moved at the same time toward Dominic. No one in the ballroom noticed, but a storm was coming, and Marcus Whitfield would be the first man drowned by it. Dominic approached Marcus with a flawless social smile that revealed nothing of what was boiling inside him. He set a hand on Marcus's shoulder in the familiar way powerful men did with each other, then tipped his head and spoke softly, saying he wanted to discuss a few things in private. Just the two of them. His tone was gentle, as if inviting a drink, but the weight in each word left no room to refuse. Marcus was almost thrilled to hear it. This was the moment he had been waiting for all night, the chance to speak alone with Dominic Castellano, the chance to discuss the alliance he had dreamed of for so long. He nodded eagerly, told Natasha he needed to step away for a moment, then led Dominic through the crowd toward the private study at the end of the hallway. His steps felt light, as if he were walking on air, completely unaware that the beast beside him had already bared its teeth. Marcus's study was a large room lined with oak bookshelves, a mahogany desk positioned before a wide window looking out over the garden. Marcus closed the door, turned to Dominic with a radiant smile, and launched into talk of cooperation, of the potential in working together, of numbers and profits the partnership could bring. He spoke like a salesman trying to close the most important deal of his life, hands cutting the air, eyes bright with ambition. Dominic said nothing. He stood still with his back against the closed door, dark eyes watching Marcus the way a man might watch an insect. The silence stretched long enough that Marcus began to slow, his sentences breaking, the smile on his mouth fading as he realized the air in the room had changed completely. The space suddenly felt cold and tight, as if someone had drawn all the oxygen out of it. Then Dominic spoke. His voice was low and cold as ice, each word delivered slowly, clearly, without emotion. He asked where Marcus's wife was, the same question he had asked earlier in the night, but now it carried an entirely different weight. This was no social nicety. This was interrogation. Marcus forced a tight smile and tried to hold himself steady. He repeated the answer he had given before, that Elena was resting, that she was pregnant and needed quiet, that the doctor had advised it. His words were still smooth, but a tremor had begun to creep into the ends of his sentences. Dominic cut him off. He said he was not asking about the story Marcus had invented. He asked where Elena was, where she really was, right now. And before Marcus could open his mouth and add another layer of lies, Dominic took one step closer, closing the distance until Marcus could see the sparks of fury in eyes black as tar. Dominic issued an order in a voice that allowed no argument. "Take me to the basement. Right now." Marcus's face changed. All color drained from his skin in an instant, leaving him corpse pale. He stammered, searching for an explanation, searching for a way out. He said Dominic had misunderstood, that the basement was only storage, that there was nothing down there, but every word he spoke only sank him deeper. At that moment, the study door opened. Vince and Tony stepped in and blocked the only exit. Two men built like fortress walls, their eyes cold and without mercy. Marcus turned to look at them, then looked back at Dominic, and in that instant he understood he had lost everything. The host's position, the power inside his own home, all of it dissolved. He was no longer the one controlling the situation. He was prey backed into a corner. Dominic did not repeat the order. He simply looked at Marcus with the eyes of a man ready to kill if necessary, and both of them knew it was not an empty threat. Trembling, Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring of keys. He tried one last explanation, his voice going thin with fear. He said Dominic did not understand, that she knew too much about his work, that he had no other choice, that this was only temporary until he figured out what to do. Dominic stepped forward and snatched the keys from Marcus's hand in a movement quick as lightning. He stared straight into the other man's eyes, his voice cold as steel. "Open the door, now, and if she has even one injury, you will want to pray you were never born." Dominic shoved Marcus ahead of him, the ring of keys clenched tight in his fist. They moved down the corridor behind the kitchen, where the light thinned and the party's music became nothing more than a distant echo. Vince stayed close behind Marcus, making sure he had no chance to run or signal anyone. Tony brought up the rear, his eyes constantly sweeping the surroundings for trouble. Each step Dominic laid onto the stone floor sounded heavy as a hammer strike, each one another layer of anger piling up, each one bringing him closer to the woman he had searched for through 3 long years. The iron door came into view, dull, gray, and menacing under the weak yellow light. Dominic looked at the 3 heavy locks and felt the rage in his chest flare hotter. 3 locks to hold a pregnant woman. 3 locks to imprison the woman who had saved his life. He slid the key into the first lock and turned it, metal clacking in the silent corridor. The second, the third. Each click cut into him like a blade as he imagined Elena inside hearing those sounds day after day, never knowing whether what approached was hope or the beginning of another fear. Dominic pushed the iron door open. It swung with the high, ugly squeal of rusted hinges, and then he saw her. Elena was curled in the farthest corner of the basement, her back against the freezing concrete wall, both arms locked around her swollen belly, as if she were guarding the most precious thing in the world. She was so thin, her collarbone stood out beneath skin gone paper pale, her face hollowed, her eyes sunken with dark bruised shadows beneath them. Her dark brown hair was a matted tangle, clumped in places, and the thin nightgown on her trembling body was wrinkled, torn, and stained. Her lips were cracked, blood at the corners. She looked like a ghost, like something dragged up from hell, nothing like the lively young woman in the photo Tony had sent him. When the door opened, Elena shrank back on instinct, the reflex of survival driving her to make herself smaller and smaller, as if she could disappear into the wall. Her eyes went wide, panicked, fearful, waiting for the next blow, waiting for the next cruelty. She had learned too well that an opening door usually meant pain, but then she saw the man standing in the doorway. Not Marcus. A tall man in a charcoal gray suit, black hair, dark eyes fixed on her with something she could not read. And in that moment, in the weak yellow light spilling in from the corridor, Elena recognized him. That face, those eyes. She had looked into those eyes 3 years ago, when she stitched the wounds of a stranger in her small Chicago apartment. Their gazes met. 3 years, thousands of miles, countless sleepless nights and hopeless searches. And now they faced each other in this pitch-dark basement, only a few steps apart. Dominic stepped down the last stairs, each footfall echoing on the cold concrete. He moved closer to Elena and sank to his knees in front of her, not caring that his expensive suit brushed the filthy floor. His eyes took her in, seeing every bruise, every scrape, every mark of suffering and despair carved into her fragile body. And in his gaze, for the first time in a long time, there was something other than cold control, pain, guilt, and a tenderness he did not know he could still feel. Dominic slipped off his suit jacket and gently draped it over Elena's shaking shoulders. The warmth of his body still clung to the fabric, wrapping her like an embrace. He spoke, his voice low and rough with emotion, 2 simple words carrying an entire world of regret. "I'm sorry. I'm too late." Elena looked at him, and the brown eyes that had gone dry from too much crying filled again. Tears streamed down her hollow cheeks and fell onto the jacket holding her. She could not find words, her throat tightening shut, but her whole body trembled with something that was not fear. For the first time in days, in weeks, she felt safe. For the first time she was not alone. For the first time someone had come for her. Dominic reached for her slowly, gently, so she would not panic. He slid one arm beneath her knees and the other behind her back and lifted her from the frozen floor. Elena was so light he barely felt her weight, far lighter than a woman 7 months pregnant should have been. She closed her eyes and rested her head against his chest, tears still falling, soaking the white shirt beneath his jacket. Dominic turned with Elena in his arms to face Marcus, who stood cowering at the top of the stairs while Vince held his arm in a hard grip. Dominic's eyes on Marcus were no longer anger. They were the stare of death itself, cold, absolute, without a trace of mercy. He spoke in a voice as calm as if he were commenting on the weather, yet every word carried the weight of a death sentence. "You will pay for every second she was down here. Every second." Dominic emerged from the dark hallway with Elena in his arms and walked straight into the ballroom, where music and laughter had been spilling through the air only moments before. He did not pause, did not offer explanations, did not try to hide a single thing. Each step he took across the marble sounded like a drumbeat, announcing a storm making landfall. The jazz still played, but it began to feel out of place as one pair of eyes after another turned toward Dominic. First it was the people closest to the corridor, freezing with champagne glasses lifted halfway, mouths open, unable to believe what they were seeing. Then, like a wave, silence spread across the room. Conversations died, laughter vanished. Only the saxophone kept crying out in a meaningless line until the musician realized something had happened and stopped. In Dominic's arms, Elena was an image that stole breath from the room. A 7-month belly rose beneath a thin, rumpled nightgown. Her body was so gaunt, you could nearly count bone through paper-pale skin. Her face was hollow, eyes sunk deep, dark circles bruising the flesh beneath them. Her hair was matted and tangled. Her lips were split, blood at the corners. She looked as if she had stepped out of hell, and the truth was she had. No one needed an explanation to understand what had happened. The sight in front of them said everything. Dominic stopped in the center of the ballroom, Elena still in his arms, and his dark eyes swept the crowd. He did not need to speak loudly. In the dead silence of the room, his voice carried like thunder in a still night. He said this was Elena Whitfield, Marcus Whitfield's wife. The woman Marcus claimed was upstairs resting because pregnancy had made her tired. He said she had just been found in the basement, locked away like an animal, while her husband held a party overhead. He paused long enough for every word to sink into every mind. Then he continued, his voice cold as steel. Anyone planning to do business with Marcus Whitfield should think again. The silence that followed Dominic's statement weighed heavier than any noise. Eyes shifted from Elena to Marcus, and in those eyes was contempt no one bothered to hide. This was a room full of killers, smugglers, men who lived outside the law. They were not saints, but even in the underworld there were lines no one was supposed to cross, and abusing a pregnant wife was one of them. A man who could not protect his wife and child, or worse, a man who harmed them himself, was not worthy of respect, not worthy of trust, not worthy of standing in this room. A boss from the eastern side of the city shook his head, set his champagne down, and stepped away from Marcus, as if he might be contaminated. A well-known politician turned his face aside and pretended he had never known the host. Business partners Marcus had spent years carefully cultivating now looked at him the way you looked at a mangy dog. The empire Marcus had worked so hard to build was collapsing in front of him, one brick at a time, one relationship at a time. In the corner, Natasha Blake stood frozen, her face white as paper. She had known. Of course she had known where Elena was being kept. She had played at concern, played at pity, while the real woman endured hell right beneath her feet. And now, with the truth exposed, Natasha realized she had no place left in this room. She edged backward into the shadows, trying to disappear before anyone remembered she was there. Marcus lunged free of Vince's grip, his face twisted with panic and rage. He shouted, his voice high and shrill, stripped of all the poise of a successful businessman. He said she was his wife. He had the right. She knew too much about his work, about the operations, about secrets that would bring everything down if they ever surfaced. He had no choice. He had to keep her quiet. He looked around, searching for a sympathetic face, a look of understanding, anyone at all who might stand with him. But there was no one. The faces around him held only disgust and contempt. The people he had once called partners now looked at him like a stranger. The men he had tried to impress now turned their backs. In a room full of power, Marcus Whitfield stood alone, utterly isolated. His empire turned to ash in less than a minute. Dominic wasted not a single additional second in that room full of people stunned into contempt. He turned with Elena still in his arms and moved quickly toward the front door. Vince guiding the way ahead, Tony covering the rear, the formation flowing like a machine that had been programmed long ago. And guests automatically parted to either side as they passed, no one daring to stand in the path of the Mafia boss carrying a woman just pulled back from hell. Behind them, Marcus, like an animal driven to the edge, finally snapped out of shock and understood that if Elena left this house, everything would be over. Not only his reputation in ruins, but the secrets she knew, the numbers, the names, the operations he had been foolish enough to let her overhear by accident. And if Elena spoke, he would not only lose everything, he might lose his life. Desperation turning him feral. Marcus screamed for his men, ordered them to stop them, not to let her leave no matter what it took, his voice thin and panicked, stripped of any trace of a powerful host. And a few of his guards reacted on instinct and started toward the door, but they halted when Vince turned, eyes cold as ice, his hand already resting on the gun hidden beneath his suit jacket. Because facing Dominic Castellano's people was not something any sane man chose. Dominic's glossy black convoy was still waiting at the stone steps, the driver ready after the signal Tony had sent minutes earlier. Vince opened the rear door. Dominic carefully set Elena into the seat and slid in beside her. Tony jumped into the front passenger seat. Vince took the wheel of the second vehicle. Engines roared and tires bit into gravel as the convoy surged out through the Whitfield gates. But Marcus did not give up. He stormed into the yard, screaming for his private driver to bring the car, calling for more men, promising double rewards to anyone who could stop Dominic's convoy. Desperation turning him reckless and blind, no longer thinking about what it meant to challenge Dominic Castellano, knowing only that if Elena got away, he would lose everything. Two of Marcus's black SUVs tore out of the mansion gates only minutes after Dominic's vehicles, cutting onto the main Beverly Hills road with headlights glaring in the night, engines snarling like predators on the hunt, and the chase began along the quiet streets of the wealthy district, where million-dollar estates stood silent behind tall iron fences, unaware of the drama unfolding right in front of them. Inside the car, Dominic sat beside Elena, one hand steadying her against the seat, the other gripping the handle as the vehicle took hard turns. Elena still trembling, her body spent after days of captivity, yet forcing herself to stay quiet, unwilling to become a burden. And then suddenly she folded inward, both hands clamping around her belly, her face twisting with pain, a moan slipping from her cracked lips, small but enough for Dominic to hear. He looked down and saw her breathing fast, cold sweat beading on her forehead despite the cool air in the car, her hands locked around her pregnant belly, knuckles bleached white with effort, and Dominic felt his heart tighten. She was in pain, not ordinary pain. Something was wrong with the baby. Tony twisted in his seat from the front, worry sharpening his eyes as he took in Elena's condition, asked whether they needed a hospital immediately. Dominic nodded and ordered a route change to the nearest hospital, yet in the rearview mirror he saw the headlights of the pursuing vehicles still clinging close behind with no sign of giving up. Elena opened her eyes, brown eyes flooded with tears from the pain as she looked up at Dominic, trying to say something but unable to push words through the agony, and Dominic reached for her icy hand and squeezed gently to steady her, then spoke to her in a low, certain voice, 2 words he needed her to believe more than anything: "Hold on." And he looked straight into her eyes so she could see the resolve there. He would get her somewhere safe, he promised. Dominic's convoy tore through the streets of Beverly Hills at a dizzying speed. Vince was at the wheel of the vehicle carrying Dominic and Elena, both hands locked on the steering wheel, his eyes narrowed in total focus on the road ahead. He had driven through countless dangerous situations in 12 years working for Dominic, but tonight held one factor that tightened everything to a wire: the pregnant woman in the back seat. Every sharp turn, every sudden surge of speed could put her and the baby at risk. In the rearview mirror, Vince saw the headlights of 2 black SUVs still glued to them, refusing to give up even as the gap stretched and shrank with every maneuver. Marcus's men as unhinged as their boss, reckless to the point of being deadly. Vince pressed the accelerator harder and shot through an intersection just as the light turned red, tires screaming against the pavement. Behind them, Tony was driving the second vehicle and deliberately slowing to wedge himself between Dominic's car and the pursuers. He swung left, then right, blocking Marcus's SUVs from passing. It was a silent fight on night streets where every second could decide who lived and who died. Then gunfire cracked open the night. The dry, sharp sound ripped through the quiet of the rich neighborhood. 1 shot, 2, 3 in quick succession, Marcus's men deciding to use force. Vince cursed and floored it, the car turning into an arrow cutting through darkness. Dominic bent low and shielded Elena with his own body, forcing her down against the seat. He could hear bullets slicing the air, the ugly slap of metal when one round struck the car's body. Then came a deafening blast. The rear window shattered, thousands of glass fragments spraying into the cabin like a storm of crystal. Dominic felt cold wind rush in, felt tiny shards scattering across his back and shoulders, and for a split second he thought a bullet had gone through someone. His heart stopped for a beat as he checked Elena beneath him, but she was not hit. The round had punched through the rear glass and buried itself in the front seat, only a few centimeters from Dominic's head. No one had been shot, not yet. Elena curled under Dominic's cover, her whole body shaking uncontrollably. The gunfire, the exploding glass, the chaos of the chase pushed her past the limits of what she could endure, and the pain in her abdomen flared hotter, as if an invisible hand were squeezing her womb in a fist. She cried out, the sound weak and thin under the wind rushing through the broken window, both hands clamping her belly as if she feared the baby might fall away. Behind them, Tony decided to end the pursuit. He jerked the wheel hard and drove his vehicle straight into the side of the lead SUV. Metal slammed into metal with a brutal screech, and both vehicles spun across the road. Marcus's SUV lost control, jumped the curb, and crashed into the iron fence of a mansion. The second SUV braked hard to avoid plowing into the wreckage and lost momentum, the chase broken. Tony's own car was damaged too, but he forced it onward, because protecting the boss still came first. At last, the distance between Dominic's car and the pursuers opened up. Vince did not slow down. He kept driving hard toward the nearest hospital. Behind them, distant police sirens began to wail, someone in the wealthy neighborhood having called it in after hearing gunshots. Inside the car, Dominic lifted himself up and gently helped Elena out of the crouched position. He looked at her face and saw pain carved into every line, sweat soaking her forehead, lips drained pale, breath fast and shallow. Her hands stayed pressed to her belly, and Dominic could see her body tightening with wave after wave of cramps. Elena parted her lips and whispered so faintly Dominic had to lean close to hear her. She spoke about the baby. Something was wrong. She could feel it. Something was very wrong. Her voice trembled, tears spilling from the corners of her eyes and mixing with the cold sweat on her cheeks. Dominic gripped her hand, squeezing like a vow. He turned to Vince, his voice sharp as a blade. The hospital. As fast as you can. Do not worry about traffic laws. Do not worry about anything else. Just get her to the hospital alive. Vince nodded and drove his foot down to the floor. Sirens tore open the night before Vince could reach the hospital. Blue and red lights flashed ahead, blocking the road that led to the main boulevard. 3 police cruisers lined side by side to seal the lane and force Vince to slow and stop. Behind them, 2 more patrol cars swung into position, cutting off every route of escape. The chase ended not because one side won, but because the law had arrived. From the lead car, a woman stepped out, Detective Rachel Chen, 38 years old, black hair tied neatly at the nape, a hard face belonging to someone who had seen too much of this city's darkness. She walked straight toward Dominic's vehicle, one hand resting near the gun at her hip, her eyes never leaving the people inside. Behind her, other officers spread out and locked down the area. Dominic opened the door and stepped out slowly with both hands raised to show he was unarmed. He knew how to handle police. He had done it hundreds of times. But tonight his priority was not himself. He turned back, carefully helped Elena out of the vehicle, and set her with her back against the car because she was too weak to stand on her own. At that moment, a battered black SUV came skidding in and slammed on its brakes beside the police line. Marcus Whitfield jumped out, his face warped by rage and panic. He charged toward Detective Chen, pointing at Dominic, shouting for her to arrest the kidnapper of his wife. He said Dominic Castellano had stormed into his home, forced his wife to leave with him, and he demanded the legal rights of a husband be protected. Detective Chen lifted a hand, ordering Marcus to stop, her eyes turning cold as she took him in. Then she looked past him to Elena, the woman trembling beside Dominic, her belly heavy with 7 months of pregnancy, her frame gaunt, her face pale as someone close to death. Chen stepped closer and examined her carefully. The bruises on Elena's arms, the scrapes on her hands, fingernails broken and torn as if she had clawed at something hard in desperation, lips split from thirst, deep black hollows under her eyes, the thin, dirty nightgown utterly wrong for the cold night air. Detective Chen asked Elena a direct question. She asked what had happened. Elena opened her mouth, and though her voice shook, weak and thin, every word came out clear as a bell in the silent night. She said he locked her up, and she pointed at Marcus. He locked her in the basement. For weeks, in darkness and cold. She was 7 months pregnant, and he kept her like an animal. She screamed for help, but no one heard. She pounded on the door until her hands bled, but no one came. Detective Chen looked from Elena to Marcus, then back to Elena. She did not need anything else. 20 years on the job had taught her the difference between a real victim and an act, and the woman in front of her, with her wasted body and haunted eyes, was real. She ordered the officers to cuff Marcus Whitfield. He screamed, protested, said it was a misunderstanding, said she was lying, said he had a lawyer, but no one listened. The cold click of handcuffs closing around his wrists was the last sound of power he had ever believed he owned. Elena watched Marcus being led away, and her body suddenly went soft, as if the final cord holding her upright had been cut. It was over. She was safe. And with that thought, her eyes closed and she collapsed into Dominic's arms. He caught her before she hit the ground, called her name, but she did not answer. Detective Chen immediately called for an ambulance on her radio. The wail of an ambulance siren sounded far away, then closer and closer in the night. The ambulance tore into the emergency bay at Cedars-Sinai with its siren screaming. The rear doors flew open, paramedics jumped down, and Elena was rushed inside on a gurney. Dominic followed close behind until a nurse raised a hand and stopped him at the entrance to the emergency area. She told him he could not go in, that the doctors needed space to work, that he had to wait outside. Dominic wanted to shove past her and storm in, but he knew it would only make everything worse. He stood there and watched the doors swing shut, swallowing Elena into the bright, sterile world beyond, and felt a kind of helplessness he rarely ever had to endure. The hospital corridor at midnight was eerily empty. Cold, white fluorescent light washed over plastic chairs lined along the wall, and the sharp, clean smell of disinfectant hung in the air. Dominic sat on a chair facing the emergency doors, elbows braced on his knees, hands laced together in front of him. He did not look at his watch. He did not need to. Every minute that passed stretched like an hour. Vince and Tony arrived after handling everything with the police. Vince came up beside Dominic, his voice low and careful. He said it had been taken care of, that Marcus had been brought to the station, that Detective Chen would contact them later for statements. Then he hesitated before adding, "Boss, we should go home. Leave someone here to monitor. You need rest after tonight." Dominic did not lift his head. He only said 2 short words, "I'm here." His voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of an order that could not be argued with. Vince understood. He nodded to Tony, and the two of them stepped back, taking positions at opposite ends of the corridor to give the boss space while keeping security tight. In the thick silence of the late night, Dominic let his mind drift backward. 3 years ago, Chicago. The small apartment of a stranger. He remembered Elena's eyes as she stitched his wounds, focused and gentle. Not a trace of fear, even though she knew who he was. Even though she knew dangerous men were hunting him just beyond her door. He remembered her small hands, steady as stone, pulling a blanket up over him, forcing him to swallow medicine, cooking porridge and feeding it to him 1 spoonful at a time. Pure kindness. No profit. No demands. Just one human being helping another. And tonight he had almost left her. When Vince reported the cry for help from the basement, Dominic had said it was not his business. He had turned his back on the woman who had saved him, without even knowing. If Tony had not dug deeper, if Dominic had not seen that photo, Elena might still be down in that freezing cellar, alone, desperate, waiting for salvation that would never come. The thought brought nausea up into Dominic's throat. Time crawled forward in suffocating silence. 1 hour, 2. Dominic did not move, his gaze fixed on the emergency doors. Then at last the doors opened. A doctor in a white coat stepped out, his face tired but not strained. He looked down the hallway, and when he saw Dominic rise, he came closer. He said Elena was stable. She was severely exhausted, dehydrated, malnourished, and extreme stress had triggered early uterine contractions. But they had managed to stop the contractions for now. The baby's heartbeat is stable, but weak. Both of them are in a fragile state. We need to keep them under close observation for the next critical 48 hours to ensure the pregnancy holds. Dominic let out a long breath. He had not even realized he had been holding it all this time. Something invisible lifted off his chest, leaving behind a strange, almost dizzy relief. The doctor studied Dominic for a moment, as if weighing the relationship between him and the patient, then added one more sentence. "She is awake, and she wants to see you." Dominic nodded his thanks and walked toward the door that led into the inpatient area, each step echoing on the hospital floor like the hard, fast rhythm of his heart. The hospital room was quiet, with only the steady beep of the heart monitor sounding like a simple, unchanging melody that somehow carried comfort. The lights had been turned low so they would not sting the patient's eyes, giving the room a soft, hazy gentleness. Elena lay in the bed with her head slightly raised on a white pillow, an IV line running from her thin arm to the saline bag hanging beside her. Her face was still pale, but less devastated than it had been a few hours earlier. Her brown eyes opened wider when she heard the door. Dominic stepped in, his tall frame filling the doorway. He still wore the white dress shirt from the party, now wrinkled and marked with a few stains from the basement. His suit jacket was gone, the one he had draped over Elena, and it was probably somewhere among the discarded clothing cut away when she came into the emergency room. He stopped beside the bed and looked down at the woman he had searched for 3 long years. He pulled a chair close and sat, saying nothing. Elena was silent too. Between them was a distance that could not be measured in feet, the distance of 3 years apart, of hopeless searching, of suffering no one had seen. There was too much to say and no clear place to begin. The heart monitor kept its steady rhythm, filling the silence. Elena spoke first. Her voice was hoarse and weak, but each word came out clear. She said she never thought she would see him again. She said she had thought about him many times over the past 3 years, wondering if he had survived, wondering if his wounds had healed, wondering if he ever remembered the girl who helped him that night. But she never believed they would meet again, and she certainly never imagined it would be like this. Dominic listened, his eyes never leaving Elena's face, and he asked how she had ended up married to Marcus, how she had gone from Chicago to Los Angeles, from being a working nurse to the wife of a wealthy businessman. Elena closed her eyes for a moment as if gathering the courage to reach back into her past. Then she began. She met Marcus 8 months after the night she saved Dominic. He came to the hospital where she worked, polished and charming, always bringing flowers and gifts. He told her he loved her at first sight, told her he wanted to marry her, give her the life she deserved. She was an orphan who had grown up in the foster system, who had never truly had a family, and Marcus said exactly what she needed to hear. After the wedding, everything changed. Slowly, little by little, Marcus isolated her from friends, took her to Los Angeles and cut her off from everyone she had known. He controlled the money, controlled where she went, who she saw. By the time she realized she was living in a prison with no bars, there was no way out left. Then she became pregnant, and it only got worse. She accidentally overheard one of Marcus's calls and learned about his illegal operations, and he could not let her live with that secret. Dominic listened and gripped the chair's armrest so hard his knuckles went white. He wanted to stand up, find Marcus, and kill him with his own hands. But he stayed still, because the woman in front of him needed his calm more than she needed his rage. He told Elena he had searched for her everywhere, for 3 years, sending people to every hospital in Chicago, every neighborhood she might have lived in, every city she might have gone to. He did not know her name, and he had no clear photo, only the memory of brown eyes and gentle hands. He searched and never found her, and it turned out she had been right under his feet all night. Tears welled in Elena's eyes and slid down her pale cheeks. She said she did not deserve it, did not deserve for him to search, did not deserve to be saved. She was only an ordinary woman who had made one wrong choice and was paying the price. Dominic reached out and gently took Elena's cold hand. He squeezed lightly, enough for her to feel that he was there but not enough to hurt. He looked straight into her eyes, his voice low and steady. He told her she had saved his life. She did not know who he was, did not know what he could repay her with, but she saved him anyway. It was the purest kindness he had ever received. She should never say she was not worthy. Elena wept, but these were not tears of suffering or despair. They were the tears of someone who, for the first time in a very long time, felt seen, valued, recognized as a human being who mattered. She held Dominic's hand tightly, as if afraid that if she let go he would disappear and all of it would turn out to be a dream. While Elena rested in the hospital, the machinery of justice began to turn. Detective Rachel Chen led her team to the Whitfield mansion that same night. A search warrant rushed through and signed by an on-call judge after hearing a summary of what had happened. The ornate wrought iron gate that had once stood as a symbol of wealth and power now swung wide to admit police vehicles with blue and red lights strobing against the dark. The estate still carried the fingerprints of the party from only hours before. Half-finished champagne glasses on tables, trays of food gone cold, fresh flowers still fragrant in crystal vases, but the luxury in the air had been stained into the atmosphere of a crime scene, and forensic technicians in white moved through the rooms photographing, collecting samples, and flagging evidence. The basement became the center of the investigation. Detective Chen went down herself, and what she saw forced her to work to keep her professional composure. The concrete floor was brutally cold, marked by dried blood from Elena's fingernails where she had clawed at the door. There was no bed, no blanket, no real toilet, only a plastic bucket in the corner and a few empty water bottles. This was not temporary confinement. This was a dungeon. But the most important discovery came from the mansion's security camera system. Marcus, in his paranoid need to control everything, had installed cameras throughout the house to watch his wife and the staff, never imagining the same system would become the evidence that convicted him. The footage clearly showed Marcus grabbing Elena by the hair, dragging her down the hallway, opening the basement door, and shoving her onto the dark stairs. It showed him locking 3 heavy locks with calm indifference, as if he were putting away an object in storage and not sealing his pregnant wife into hell. Marcus's phone was seized and unlocked by the digital team, and inside was a trove of evidence. Threatening messages he had sent to Elena before he locked her up, warnings that if she ever spoke a word about what she knew, she would regret it, calls and messages with crooked partners, documents outlining money laundering through shell companies, smuggling contracts disguised as legitimate commercial transactions. Marcus had built his filthy empire carefully over years, and yet he had also kept every piece of proof, as a habit of a man addicted to control. Natasha Blake was brought in for questioning next. The woman who had stood beside Marcus at the party wearing smug satisfaction, now sitting curled in an interrogation room, mascara smeared from crying, her hands trembling as she signed her statement. She confessed everything in exchange for a reduced sentence agreement. She knew Elena was locked away. She knew about the illegal operations. She knew every dark secret Marcus had tried to hide, and now she poured it out, detail by detail, to save herself. By the next morning, the news exploded across every paper and television channel, headlines everywhere about a wealthy businessman keeping his pregnant wife locked in a basement during his birthday party. Photos of Marcus in his perfect suit from earlier public events ran alongside images of him in an orange jail uniform. Business partners rushed to issue statements cutting ties. Politicians who had once shaken his hand now denied knowing him. The empire Marcus had built over 20 years turned to ash in less than 24 hours. In a small cell at the Los Angeles Detention Center, Marcus Whitfield sat alone on a hard iron bed, the perfect black suit replaced by orange inmate clothing, the Rolex seized along with every other asset. He stared down at his hands that had once held power and money, now reduced to trembling fingers. Everything he had built, every relationship he had cultivated, every secret he had tried to bury, all of it had collapsed in a single night, and he knew this was only the beginning. The charges stacking up, from unlawful imprisonment and domestic abuse to money laundering and smuggling, were enough to keep him in prison for the rest of his life. The days that followed passed in the quiet peace of Cedars-Sinai. Elena was moved from the emergency department to a regular room, a private room with a wide window looking down on the garden below. Afternoon sunlight slipped through a thin curtain and laid warm bands of light across the white blanket. She received full IV fluids, 8 nourishing meals prepared by the hospital, and rested on a soft bed instead of a freezing concrete floor. Color slowly returned to her cheeks. Her lips were no longer cracked, and the dark shadows under her eyes began to fade. Doctors checked on her every day, and each visit brought good news. The fetal heartbeat was growing stronger each day, defying the odds. While the doctors remained cautious about potential long-term effects from the malnutrition, the immediate signs were miraculously promising. The child inside her seemed stubbornly resilient, fighting beside its mother through hell, and now waiting in safety for the day it would be born. Elena placed a hand over her belly each time the doctor spoke, feeling the gentle kicks like an answer that the baby was still all right. And every day Dominic came. He never arrived empty-handed. One day it was a basket of fresh flowers, another day fruit, another day food from a famous restaurant because he had heard a nurse mention Elena was tired of hospital meals. He sat beside her bed, sometimes talking, sometimes simply reading the paper while she slept. He demanded nothing, forced nothing, only remained there, as if trying to make up for the 3 years he had failed to find her. They began talking more, at first about small things, the weather, the news, foods Elena liked, then gradually about deeper things. Elena spoke about childhood in foster homes, about her dream of becoming a nurse so she could help others, about the lonely years before she met Marcus. Dominic listened, and sometimes he spoke too, about growing up in a Mafia family, about the choices he had been forced to make, about the weight of power he had never truly wanted. Between them, an invisible thread was being woven, made of understanding and trust. On the 5th day, Dominic came with a small package wrapped in brown paper. He sat down beside the bed and placed it in Elena's hands with a look that was almost awkward. She opened it and her heart stopped for a beat. It was a book, the cover old and the corners worn, the novel she had read aloud to him at night when he was recovering from his wounds in Chicago 3 years earlier. She had read it page by page in a soft voice, hoping to help him forget the pain. She did not think he would remember. Elena looked at the book, then up at Dominic, and she smiled, a real smile, unforced, unhidden, the first one after so many months of darkness. Her brown eyes brightened, and for that moment she looked like the young woman Dominic had met in Chicago, before life pulled her down into the abyss. Outside the room, Vince and Tony stood guard as usual. Through the small glass window in the door, Vince saw the boss sitting beside Elena's bed, the book in his hands, and the face that was usually ice-cold softened in a strange way. He turned to Tony and whispered in surprise that he had never seen the boss like this, not once in 12 years working for Dominic Castellano. Tony nodded, his older eyes looking through the glass. He said she was special. He said she had saved the boss's life, and now she was saving something else inside him. In the room, Elena placed a hand over her belly as she felt a strong kick from the baby. She closed her eyes and whispered, words meant only for the child inside her, "We're going to be all right." That morning, sunlight poured into the hospital room like a warm greeting from the outside world. Golden rays slipped through the thin curtain and danced across the white blanket, chasing away the last traces of darkness lingering in the corners. Elena sat up in bed, her back supported by pillows propped high. Her brown eyes turned toward the large window where Los Angeles was waking up. Beyond the glass, the city stretched to the horizon, tall buildings catching and throwing back the sun, roads like rivers of concrete flowing through a sea of rooftops, and in the distance the Hollywood Hills with their famous white letters. Los Angeles, the city that had once been her prison, looked different through a hospital window now. No longer a place of captivity, but a place where she had been set free. A soft knock came at the door, and Elena did not need to turn her head to know who it was. Dominic stepped in carrying a fresh bouquet of sunflowers, petals blazing yellow as if they had brought sunlight with them. He set the vase on the table beside her bed, then sat in the familiar chair next to her. No small talk was necessary. Between them, simply being there was enough. Elena looked at him, her eyes holding something that was both calm and worried. She said the doctor told her she could be discharged in a few days. Her health had stabilized enough to go home, though the doctor emphasized she would still need strict bed rest and weekly checkups to ensure the baby remained safe. She paused, her voice smaller when she continued. She said she did not know where she would go after she left. She had no family, no home, no money. Everything had belonged to Marcus, and now everything was frozen in the investigation. She said she felt like someone stepping out of darkness and standing at a crossroads, not knowing which road led forward. Dominic listened, his face unreadable, but his dark eyes softened in a strange way. When Elena finished, he stayed quiet for a moment as if weighing each word. Then he spoke, his voice low and certain as always, yet with something gentler beneath it. He told her she did not need to worry. He would be here. He would take care of everything, a place to live, the costs of giving birth, anything she needed. She had saved his life, and he carried a debt he could never fully repay. Not in this lifetime, but he would try. Elena looked at him, tears rising. She asked why he was doing all of this for her. She was only a stranger who happened to help him for one night 3 years ago. She did not deserve what he was doing. Dominic did not answer right away. He reached out and gently took Elena's small hand in his. Warmth traveled from his palm into hers, steady and safe. He said that in his world, kindness was the rarest thing of all. People calculated, used, and betrayed one another every day. But she had saved a stranger without asking for anything. She had shown him there was still something good left in this life, and he would never forget it. They sat together in silence, hand in hand. There were no promises of love, no romantic declarations, only two people who had walked through darkness and found each other on the other side. Yet in the look they shared, something began to stir. A small green shoot rising from ash, waiting for time to let it grow. Elena looked down at her belly, where the baby waited in peace for the day it would be born. She thought about the future, about the trials ahead, about being a single mother, about rebuilding a life from nothing. But for the first time in a long time she did not feel afraid, because she was not alone anymore. The darkest chapter of her life had closed. Ahead lay uncertainty, unanswered questions, a road not yet drawn, but also hope, also light, also the chance to write her own story again. She had walked through hell and survived, not because of money, not because of power, but because one act of kindness 3 years ago had come back to find her at the exact moment she needed it most. This story brings us a profound lesson about the value of kindness and compassion in life. Sometimes a small act of kindness we give can return to save us in our hardest hours. Elena did not save Dominic for money or repayment. She did it simply because it was the right thing to do. And 3 years later that kindness was what pulled her out of the abyss. Real life is the same. We never know when and where the seeds of love we plant will bloom. Always treat the people around you with kindness, because this world may be vast, but it is smaller than we think. How do you feel about this story? And did it remind you of anything in real life? We truly want to hear what you feel from deep in your heart. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please tap the like button and share this video with the people you love so they can listen too. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you will not miss the moving stories we bring you every day. We sincerely thank you for staying with us until the end of this video. We wish everyone watching good health and a life filled with joy and peace each day. Hold tight to your faith in good things, because as this story has shown, kindness is never forgotten. Goodbye for now, and we will see you again in the next video.